I actually have Nicole out of Coral Springs and Sherry out of Pompano Beach. They're asking questions in relation to abortion. So one of them is, are you pro-choice for abortions in any situation?
This is, I am a pro-life. Now, I believe that there are 3 exceptions for that. I believe when you look at rape, incest, or the proven medical threat to the mother's life. And I say that because I have 2 daughters. And I'm not going to make that decision if my daughters have come up into those 3 conditions. So that's my stance on abortion.
Okay. Let's go on and move over to jobs. We have some questions related to jobs, and Brian out of Fort Lauderdale is asking, why has Congress not addressed jobs instead of wasting time with issues that have no chance of passing?
Well, I just showed you that I'm trying to introduce something to help jobs grow. I'm sorry that it took me 100 days to do it. But I was kind of learning the ropes up there, so please bear with me. But, I think that, this is one of the critical steps that I want to see. And that's why being on the Small Business Committee, it gives me a great window into understanding what is hurting our small businesses, owners out there. And being out there talking to you all helps me to understand. We have got to reduce the onerous burden of taxation and regulation on our small businesses so that they can grow and they can hire Americans. So that's why
I have a question here from Susie out of Southwest Ranchers regarding budget. And the specific question is, Ryan's budget takes 26 years to balance the budget. Is that true? And what else is out there with regards to the budget?
Yeah, the reason why it takes about 25 years is because of 2 things. He's not looking, and we're not looking to raise taxes. And the second thing is we're not looking to break the backs of seniors. I mean, there's a lot of other things that we could do. I mean, we could have made different changes as far as the change in Medicare. That could have been brought up to, if you are, at 60 or 65. I mean, we try to keep that number so that we can grandfather people in. The other thing is we really don't talk about changing the age for Social Security, which is something that Erskine Bowles and Alan Simpson have recommended. Once upon a time, the life expectancy was about, I think, 61 or 62. Life expectancy in the United States of America now is 78. And changing Social Security, that retirement age from 65 to 69, does bend the curve. But what we're trying to do, we're not trying to shop the system for the American citizen. We're trying to gradually change this thing. But I really do believe that a lot of the great positives economically will come earlier if we can do things like implementing a personal income flat tax. If we can bring down that corporate business tax rate, I think that you'll see a lot of these economic indicators pick up even faster.
Okay, and the last question here out of Pompano Beach by Baxley is there any hope that the debt or budget problems will actually be solved ever?
I think that if you look at one thing that has changed in these 100 days up in Washington, D.C., is that for the first time we are talking about cutting spending in Washington, D.C. Now, if we can sustain that, but if we can sustain that, I mean, like I said, this has only been 100 days. This is a marathon and not a sprint. But the true test for the American people is going to come in November 2012. If you want to continue to see us going on the right type of glide path. The debt and deficit problem will be exacerbated even worse if you cannot get people to Washington, D.C. that want to send the spending sickness in Washington, D.C. reverse. So that's what I believe. Look, the the GAO sent out a report about 2 months ago. It said there's $100 to $200 billion of duplicative programs in Washington, D.C. No one tackled that. Everyone came out and cheered it and said how great it was that GAO did that report, and then they just put it in a drawer and filed it away. And that's why when people came up and said $38.5 billion, man, that's the highest ever spending cut in the history of the United States of America. I said, you gotta be kidding me. Because on top of that, no one told you that the fiscal year 2011 continuing resolution had $1.05 trillion appropriations. That's the highest appropriations in the history of the United States of America. You've got to change the culture in Washington, D.C.
We have some questions here related to defense. This one comes from Eve in Fort Lauderdale. What is Congress doing to protect Israel on May 15th when the flotilla will be going to Gaza, and in September when the UN will announce the Palestinian state?
Well, the one thing that I have done, and I see this kind of train wreck coming, I did write the letter to Ambassador Susan Rice. You saw a couple of pieces of legislation that talk about Jerusalem and also talk about the UN as far as their bias. But, I mean, really, when you talk about what can be done as far as this flotilla, I mean, that's something that has to come out of the executive branch. That's the commander-in-chief. Now, what we can do in the Congress is we can stand up in a unified voice, and we can say that we want to make sure that Israel is protected. This is, without a doubt, a window of opportunity for the enemies of Israel and also the enemies of the United States of America. I mean, that's why you see a lot of this unrest that is happening across North Africa and across the Middle East, because there's an invisible hand that's orchestrating these events. And I think some of us out there know who they are, but we'll see what happens.
We have two questions here related to what's going on right now in North Africa. One comes from Steve in Fort Lauderdale, and the other from Scott in Boca, essentially the same question. Why are U.S. Army Special Forces already in Libya?
Well, boy, wherever you are, you know more than I do. Because I have to tell you that about, 3 weeks after the decision was made to commit to combat operations in Libya, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff and the Secretary of Defense appeared before the House Armed Services Committee, and they were asked, and I asked them, if you are doing close air support missions, who's on the ground directing those missions against the Libyan Army forces? And he said, there's no one on the ground. Now, I know that there are CIA operatives that are on the ground, but as far as I know, there are not United States Special Operations Forces on the ground. And if there are, that's something that we definitely will be looking into.
Congressman, I have two questions related to the Mexico border. One from Ed in Fort Lauderdale and the other from George in Deerfield Beach. One's saying 11,000 and the other's saying 35,000. So the question is, how many people have been killed along the border, and does that qualify as a war zone?
We do have a war zone on our southern border. In this present day in which we live, we cannot have an unsecured border. And this thing we have called illegal immigration is the multi-headed hydra. It's a national security issue, it's an economic issue, it's a healthcare issue, it's an education issue, it's a local criminality issue. And when you look at some of these reports, I mean, with ranchers that are sleeping with their guns in their beds because they're just afraid of what happens at night, we've got to do something about securing that border. And when you look at how we are arming and equipping our Border Patrol, they're at a decided disadvantage against the Mexican drug cartels, who have high-caliber weapons. They have RPGs, rocket-propelled grenades, heavy machine guns, mortars, and in some cases they have helicopters. So we have to be able to beef up our southern border. And let me tell you something also that really concerned me. I had the opportunity to go down to the United States Southern Command, which is headquartered down in Miami, Florida. There was a huge threat coming up out of South America, through Central America, through Mexico, and into the United States. Iran is in South America. Hezbollah is in South America. I already talked about how China is in control of the Panama Canal. And even about 50 miles away from here in the Bahamas, building a port facility there. There are some serious threats to our country. And if we're not careful, I wrote a little piece a while ago. This is a Chamberlain-Churchill moment. If you want to follow the guy that comes around with a piece of paper and says there will be peace in our times, you're setting yourself up for the exact same thing which happened to the world back in the late 1930s. There's a storm coming, and we need to prepare ourselves. Let me give you this point since we're talking about defense. In 1990, we had 546 Navy war vessels. Today we have 283. That's the truth.
Okay, so I have some questions here in relation to gas and energy.
It's
The
too
first
high.
one. And so that is actually Barbara's question out of Coral Springs, is what do you recommend that we do to actually reduce the price of gasoline and see it under control?
Not just that. You've got to develop your full spectrum of energy resources in the United States of America. That means the oil, the natural gas, the coal, the nuclear, the hydrogen, the Gulf Stream, the biofuels, as well as the renewables, the wind and the solar. The wind and the solar are not going to get us where we need to be. I mean, you're only going to get about 8 to 9% production out of that. But it's that full spectrum we have to look at. You know, something happened when the president went to Brazil. We gave them,
Something happened.
we gave them $2 billion of American taxpayer money so that they could do offshore oil exploration. And we promised them that we would be their best customer. The United States of America should be producing, consuming, and even maybe exporting its own energy resources. OPEC is nothing but dictators, despots, theocrats, and autocrats. And we're sending our treasure resources over to them. We have got to turn this thing around if we're going to have an economic future. And think about the jobs that will create. You know, part of the 21st century battlefield is energy resources. Russia has a pipeline, natural gas pipeline that goes to Europe. They're dependent upon them. We're dependent upon, you know, the Saudis or down with the Venezuelans. We've got to get ourselves independent from these countries. And that's how you will start to lower prices. It's not about going and chasing after the speculators. The speculators, that's a futures market. If we were to tell people that we're going to get after this thing, then seriously, the price would drop. This is supply and demand. That's all it's about. Basic economics.
This question is from Johnny in Hollywood. Is there any movement to streamline the development of new weapons to reduce cost and allow the production of larger numbers of weapons?
For the Department of Defense?
Yeah.
Yeah, you know, absolutely. I mean, that's one of the things we got to look at, and we've been talking about in the Armed Services Committee and also some of the subcommittees. We got to streamline this R&D process because we've got to get there. What we need to do, and this is where the experience of being in the military, we got to go down there and talk to the soldiers, sailors, and airmen and Marines and find out what exactly it is that they want and what do they need. Instead of letting the defense military industry drive what they think they need. See, this is the most important thing, and I will tell you this right now. I do not agree with nation-building, occupation-style warfare. It is not. It is a drain on our resources. You know, today, every time there's a soldier that dies in a combat zone, I get an alert. JoJo, if she's still here. JoJo sends that out. I got 5 of those today. We cannot continue to have our men and women in these static locations where they're easy targets. And these forward operating bases where there's 1 or 2 roads that they can get out of. Where these guys can go out in the middle of the night, put in these IEDs and set up ambushes. The strength of the United States military is in its strategic mobility. And that's what we have to get back to. We have to get back to building a maritime force that can present itself anywhere in the world, quickly launch, and deny this enemy whatever sanctuary he seeks to establish. It's about strike operations. That's what we need to get back to. But right now, we don't have that. And we're stretching our military so thin